Yo guys, we're here to talk about Lost Ark again. So, the age-old question, should you return to the game if you're a returning player, or should you start playing if you're a new player? So, as many of you know, there's a lot of things that are really amazing about this game, and most of them are tied to both the combat and the raids, and that's kind of the shtick that Lost Ark has. It's what it's really excelled at. And so if you really like the combat in Lost Ark, I do really encourage you, obviously, to check out the game more, either as a returning player or as a new player. But this is going to be kind of talking about, what's maybe changed, what maybe hasn't changed, and kind of going from there about whether or not I think now is a good time to return. We are going to be getting both the July patch in a few days here, and then the August patch for Valkyrie and stuff like that in August. So there is some pretty exciting things coming this summer, and overall I just want to make sure that everyone is kind of aware of like where the game sits and if it's in a good spot. In general, I do think Lost Ark is probably in the best spot it's ever been in. The combat is great, the raids are feeling great, and also not as big of a deal because of the res system. On top of that, we're getting new classes, and Paradise is going to add some solo content. So I do think that the game overall is in a pretty good spot and it's moving towards the right direction. It's just not quite there yet, but that's kind of to be expected. Nothing will ever jump from being in a bad spot to being in the best spot. There is a path in between. So in a few days we're going to be getting the big July patch, which is going to kind of catch us up to KR in terms of balance and reworks. Particular thing to note is the support rework. So a lot of things are going to be changed for supports, and they're getting a DPS spec that's actually viable. And then in August, we're going to be getting the big Valkyrie update. With those two kind of events, we're going to be getting two different types of, basically new player or new character support. And they're going to be a regular Makoko Express and then some kind of road or path event. Usually this means that you can stack those events. So in terms of, coming back to the game, making a new character, or being a new player and playing the game, those events are usually pretty juiced. And actually, I think that it will be very good at giving players a new character to work on. However, it's really going to depend on why you quit in the first place. For returning players. For new players, obviously, you're still looking to check out the game, and so there's a lot of great things. The combat, the raids are second to none. They are some of the best experiences that you can have in the genre. And genuinely, let me just say, the combat in this game feels phenomenal, and it feels better now than it ever has in the past. On top of that, the homework is a lot more forgiving than it used to be. So with the newer patches and stuff like that, we've also gotten the added res system. And so this basically makes it so that way every person in your raid can die once without having to cause issues to the whole raid. This does mean that the only thing that will actually officially wipe you is everybody dying multiple times, or big group wipe mechanics, which are fewer and far between. The homework actually feels like homework, and so because of that, it's such a good time to play Lost Ark and just kind of chill out with the homies and Discord, and then if somebody messes up, it's not a big deal anymore, whereas before it was such an issue. Gatekeeping has been a lot easier because of that too, and so people are less worried about bringing in characters that maybe look not the best. You still have gatekeeping for sure, so if that was an issue for you before, it's likely to be an issue for you now. However, with the new combat score addition and the availability of Uwu Owo, our special friends over there that are developing such a great tool for all of us in the Lost Ark community, I do think it is easier now to kind of look at your character and objectively see where you could improve. Whereas before, it wasn't quite as obvious, and so there wasn't quite enough information other than just honing your weapon on how you could get stronger. On my stream the other day, I literally had a discussion with somebody who was curious on how they could get stronger, and they have been playing the game actively again for the last few months, and even then they weren't sure. So as a returning player, something like this will hopefully help. So if you go onto Uwu Owo's page, you can actually see and find yourself. Just make sure you look for your character name and your server and stuff like that in the information, and then once you've actually found your page, you'll be able to see on the right that there's a combat rating. And if you click the button right under the combat rating, it'll actually give you a detailed breakdown of what your combat rating is and how you get that score. And so you can directly compare your score to somebody else's and get an idea for ways that you could improve your character. Now, as I mentioned previously, and as I suspected when this system first got announced, it's not perfect. So if your character has tripods or something like that, that gives you crit rate and you're already crit capped, having crit rate on your rings will still give you combat score. It's not that intelligent of a system, but the idea is that it's much simpler and much easier for someone to directly look at themselves and say, what could I improve? So for example, if we were to go and actually look at my bracelet versus, I don't know, I'll put up another bracelet to compare, you should be able to see the values that my bracelet gives me versus the values that their bracelet gives them, and then, you know, kind of get a feel for if your bracelet is good or bad. So in a way, we do have more access to information than we ever did before, and it can be useful in some things more than others. Now, it can also be useful when it comes to gatekeeping, which is why I mentioned it here. The whole point being, though, is that if you find that you are getting gate kept, you can easily look at this and try to figure out where you can improve or what to work towards next. And to clarify, this new combat rating is based off of what's going to be added to the game, I believe, in a few days. So you won't actually need to go and look at Uwu but Uwu will give you a better breakdown of where you're actually getting that number from. Now, if you left because of all the extra vertical systems and everything like that, you know, unfortunately, that's what these games are. But to some degree, that's also a necessary evil. So games like Lost Ark or other MMOs or whatever, they need a reason to push the envelope, to make you care about progressing further and further and further. And so the longer the game is out, or the longer that you're in a section of the game, the closer you get to the cap, you know, the highest item level you can, kind of thing. And then they need to continue pushing it. They need to continue pushing you to keep progressing your character, especially in a game like Lost Ark, because of the way that gold is made. So gold is printed just straight up from doing your raids, which means that there's nothing in the game to prevent it from going out of control outside of gold sinks, which is why gold sinks become necessary. And all those systems that a lot of people don't like end up being the gold sinks that the game ultimately actually does need for the game to do well. The inflation is generally bad for the game, so we do actually need those systems. However, they are much easier to interact with than they've ever been before. I've made videos on my channel about how awful the old Elixir and Transcendent systems were, and although it's not exactly a very fun experience now, it's at least quick and doesn't take, you know, a calculator to do it for you, and you can just click the button and it's a much better experience for sure. With the big July update that we're going to get in a few days, we're getting access to Paradise. So if you don't really know too much about Paradise, again, this is still pretty early, but based on what we've seen in JP, it does seem like it will be a very, very rewarding system. So it's going to be something that you ultimately do want to do across all of your characters that you want to progress. And the nice thing is that there doesn't seem to be a character limit. So if you were somebody who does like to sink a lot of time and play a lot of different alts, you could slowly get these materials each week from Paradise on, you know, as many characters as you wish. The materials themselves and even the gold are character bound, at least in China right now, and I assume that they will end up being character bound for us as well, because I still don't want to make it so that way you have too much that you can either funnel to a specific character, but that does mean that you can have all of your characters on your roster making some amount of bound gold for them and slowly push them over time. Paradise does seem to be a, you know, relatively fun solo piece of content. Hopefully, you know, it won't end up taking a ton of time once we know more about the system and how it works. Basically, you're going to do the first part, collect some gear, and then you're going to do a boss, which is going to have a leaderboard, and then after that, you'll end up doing a tower-based activity that will reward you based on the floors that you clear. Those rewards, from what we've seen, in some cases are pretty significant. I think we saw an example of somebody getting 2,000 array haul the other day, and so it can be a pretty significant deal, and huge value to do on your characters. So that will also do a few other things though, is it will make it so that way it's easier to hone because you're going to have more materials than you would have had access to before. And right now, Oreha being so pricey in the game, it means that using that activity and getting, you know, a huge amount of Oreha like that is actually a lot of gold that you get to save. On top of that, it will add a layer of, you know, solo content to the game finally. So we do have some solo raids, but ultimately that's not really, you know, end game solo content, at least not at the moment. So if you're looking for them to do the latest and greatest raids in solo mode, unfortunately that's not going to have changed for you. And honestly, it doesn't look like that's going to be changing anytime soon. But you know, as always, keep an eye on it if you are really interested in that kind of thing. My hope is that eventually Paradise can kind of give that kind of fun solo end game feel, but it's still pretty early on, and obviously we haven't actually gotten the system in global yet. But once we do get it, I do want to do a breakdown and kind of let you guys know where I think this could go. Keep in mind too that Paradise, even if it's not in the best iteration now, this is only the very beginning of it, and it's very likely to evolve over time. So if you're not liking the difficulty, or if you think it's too easy or whatever, you know, make sure that you give that feedback in the official Discord, because then they can take that and they can tune the experience the way that we want it to be tuned. I'm hoping for something more akin to like a Mage Tower experience, where it is pretty challenging and does push you to know the limits of your class, but we'll ultimately have to wait and see how it turns out. And like I said, try not to judge it too harshly based on this first iteration, because it's very likely to change, especially because China only got it last week and we're getting it this week. And so there really hasn't been time for any kind of balance or adjustments or updates or anything. And on top of that, you know, KR isn't even going to be getting it till September. So it might take them some time to actually make the changes that we want to see. All right, so here's the big one. If pay to win is the reason why you quit, then you should not come back to the game. Because pay to win, I think, is in the worst spot it's ever been in Lost Ark. Right now, you know, I was capable of doing the numbers I needed to clear Mortem on hard mode during Prague week 3. I probably could have done week 1 and 2 as well, but for reference, some of my friends who are more progressed in their account, not necessarily from pay to win, is the fact that like they're doing more than like double my damage. So there's a huge difference between players who are giga like whale invested and not. So if that was, you know, something that you didn't like about the game, that, like I said, definitely hasn't changed now. However, with that being said, it does seem like Paradise won't really be truly whale and may come down to more RNG, at least for right now. Again, we'll have to wait and see, but I'm very looking forward to a piece of content in the game that's maybe not as pay to win, or not pay to win at all. Fingers crossed. You know, as I said previously, if you're a returner looking to return to the game, it really is going to depend on the reason why. So hopefully this kind of gave you a little bit of insight into maybe kind of what's going on, some of the things that are happening soon, and then just kind of the overall state of the game. If you're a new player and you're looking at getting into Lost Ark, it still has some more issues too. And I've talked about this before, but like making new characters as a new player, it can be pretty rough. So if you're okay with taking it slow and making one character at a time with the events, you could definitely do that. Ultimately, would I recommend this game to a new player? To be honest, no. It's not in a place where I think a new player could actually play the game. A new player can make one character with this upcoming event, and then they'll get to play, you know, they'll do like 2 hours, maybe 3 of doing their raids. Maybe a little bit longer than that, but they are adjusting some of the solo modes to be easier as well. And then, you know, do their Paradise, and then they're done for the week. So it's not really something that I would recommend to a new player. But like I said, if you're interested in, you know, doing a slow burn, you know, maybe you could check it out. So, all right, well, if you made it this far, thank you guys again so much for watching. I greatly appreciate it. You know, feel free to like, comment down below, subscribe to the channel, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Have a good one. Peace out.